Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. Workplace vaccine mandates rolled in with a thunder and have caused major upheaval in so many Canadians' lives. And let's be clear, if you got both shots of the vaccine, you keep your job. It's those Canadians who refuse to submit to the mandate and get the jab who are caught in the crosshairs. But is this right? Should workplaces be able to mandate a healthcare treatment as a condition of your employment? And retroactively? Some might argue that healthcare workplaces should have such policies in place, that there ought to be no exemptions for anyone in healthcare. But is this just? Shouldn't healthcare workers be treated just as every other Canadian? And if many healthcare workers leave their positions, what will the state of our healthcare be? For example, 2,000 long-term care and assisted living care workers in BC are facing unemployment because of non-compliance with the mandate. This mandate, just to be clear again, isn't exclusive to the healthcare sector. Universities, telecommunications, banks, everyone seems to have a mandate. Even the auto manufacturers like Ford, GM, and Stellantis, who employ thousands of workers in Canada, are mandating vaccines by December. I've even heard of law firms doing the same. And some companies are even mandating that their remote, home-based workers get vaxxed or get out. But can your boss compel you to get a vaccine? Are you required to divulge your personal healthcare information to your employer? Are there any grounds for exemptions, such as creed or medical? And if you are terminated, is there legal recourse? Well, joining me later in the program to share her legal expertise is labor lawyer from Workley Law, Sunira Chaudhri. But now we will hear from two Canadians facing termination. Their names and images have been altered to protect their identity. And first up, we're going to hear from Beth, an LTC employee. Beth, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm sorry you're in your situation. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your job?
So basically in the early months of the pandemic, I decided to get a job at a long-term care home. And because I wanted to serve in any way that I could. And yeah, so up until now, I've been working there for almost a year and a half, serving throughout the pandemic. So.
And now you're that's obviously very noble. Like when most of us were probably staying away from long-term care centers, you jumped in and said, hey, I'm going to help out. But now you're first facing termination. Why?
Because they have a policy and they did not give me any options. And basically they're holding firm to their policy and they're not being accommodating to healthcare workers, and they're not respecting their religious exemptions, for others, medical exemptions. And so if I don't want to get the vaccine, they basically are giving me no other option and I'm left to be terminated.
My goodness. So was there ever an option for rapid testing? Like, have you been subjected to rapid testing? I know that was a thing in some LTCs for the last several months.
Yeah, over the past year and a half that I've been working there, I've never resisted getting any rapid testing. Even we were asked to get PCR testing, and I've always been willing to comply with that, as well as wearing all the mandatory PPE. Like I was always wearing my mask, sometimes even a face shield, that kind of stuff. And yeah, that was never really an issue for me, but getting a rapid test wasn't a alternate option instead of the vaccine. So
once the mandate is in, like there's no more rapid testing, you either have the vaccine or you don't.
Yes, pretty much.
So what will you do?
Well, instead of some people are giving in, but having the freedom to for Canadians to have freedom is much more important than giving in to getting a jab. And even if it costs my job, then I can get a job somewhere else, because I don't want to be part of that movement where people are subject to being controlled.
Okay, and we only have about 20 seconds left, but some people say you're in a high-risk environment, you should get the vaccine. What's your quick response to that?
I would say it's a personal choice. And if I'm willing to get rapid testing, that ensures the safety of my team members and the residents at the facility.
Okay, Beth, good luck with you. We've run out of time, but I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Welcome back. We just heard from somebody from the healthcare sector, but what happens if you work in the private sector? Well, joining us now is David, who again works in the private sector, to share with us his experience with the vaccine mandate. David, thank you so much for joining me today and to share your story. So maybe you can start by telling us about your job and what's happening.
Thanks for having me, Tanya. Well, for the last 16 years, I've been an employee for a federally regulated telecom company, and this, work that I do is primarily office work, dealing with mostly high tech skilled tradesmen out in the field. And as of the September 20th, we were put on notice that we were to provide our vaccination status or be put on unpaid leave of absence. This company is not, my job specifically is not public facing. I have no interactions with the general population,
Right.
just a bridge basically between field techs and engineers.
Okay, so you probably were somewhat caught off guard then when this company for which you work brought in a vaccine mandate, because it sounds like, again, you have very little public interaction. So why the mandate? So now you're, I assume, facing termination?
Yes, I'm facing, an unpaid leave of absence, which is essentially a termination. If they're not going to pay me, I can't pay the bills, so I have to move on with my life. But yeah, the most surprising aspect of it was the announcement from the federal government did not include the private sector. It only included the travel industry and public sector workers. But like a wave, it just flooded over the industry.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hearing from other telecom people in other companies that they have the same sort of mandate coming down, which is very worrisome and surprising.
So why won't you disclose your personal vaccination status? Why won't you get the vaccine? What's the holdup for you?
I'm very concerned with my privacy. I believe that the individual has a right to have privacy in all aspects of their life, especially when it comes to any sort of medical issue. Vaccination status is just one thing. When I was hired, they didn't ask for my vaccination status. No one asks if you have your tetanus shot or your whatever shot. It doesn't matter. And then just suddenly, we now mandate that everyone needs to show their vaccination status. It's, as far as I'm concerned, well, it's wrong. First of all, it's my medical information.
Right.
It's protected by the law. But secondly, it sets a bad precedent. If first it's vaccination status, what are they going to start asking next? All kinds of personal information that is frankly no business of an employer if it doesn't impede my ability to do the job.
Fair point.
For the last 18 months, we've been able to operate successfully, with whatever regulations public health puts out with in regards to sanitizing, hand washing, that sort of thing, wearing masks indoors, that in public setting, and not public, but in a group setting. I don't see how we go from that to everyone now needs to take an injection or you can't do your job. It just seems surreal to me.
And
So,
during the first few lockdowns, because we're in multiple now, will this mandate impact those who may have for the last 18 months been working at home, or is it just those who come to a workplace? Is there an option to work from home? Is there an accommodation being made?
there is only accommodation for people with valid medical exemptions. And they define a valid medical exemption as somebody who has had a reaction to a first dose of the vaccine, or somebody who can prove that they have an adverse reaction to some ingredient in the vaccine, either through testing at a immunologist or allergist.
Okay.
I was told that by my family doctor when asked that they were told by the College of Physicians that if they were to hand out a doctor's note or some sort of medical exemption note, that their license could be taken away from them to practice medicine.
My goodness. So things are
it's
very grim, and it sounds like you don't really have many options available to you. Welcome back. So we've heard from 2 employees who are being impacted by these vaccine mandates in workplaces. Well, joining us now to help us unpack all the legal angles with contract law, with labor law, is partner at Workley Law, Sunira Chaudhri. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Tanya.
Okay, so how rampant are these vaccine mandates within the workplace?
Oh, I think rampant is the right word for it. I think most small employers, medium-sized employers, we've seen it really from the top down, right? We've seen it at the federal level, provincial. City of Toronto has taken a very, very strict view of mandating vaccines in the workplace. The City of Toronto is looking at having 3,000 to 4,000, potentially more employees suspended for not being vaccinated. So they're taking a very strong stance on vaccination. I think by seeing government so comfortable issuing these mandates, that other businesses are following in lockstep with that, feeling much more confidence in having their own employees vaccinated as well.
So is this, a situation of keeping up with the Joneses? Well, if the federal government's doing it, then perhaps I ought to. Are actually private businesses, like your law firm, for example, or any other private business, are they compelled to have a vaccine mandate?
Well, we're a small business. We feel like we need to have a mandatory vaccine policy for employees who are coming into the workplace. As I'm sure you've seen, Tanya, the world of work has changed. You have hybrid work environments, some people working from home. There's a remote relationship there between employers and employees, not like ever before, but we felt we needed to have it also to serve our clients. We have some clients that just demand that they want to be seen in person. And frankly, their case may actually call for that. You can't do everything over the phone. We know that. You can't do everything over Zoom. So requiring a vaccine mandate in certain circumstances where the work can't get done remotely makes complete sense. When I'm talking to other employers, I don't know that it's keeping up with the Joneses, but what I do think is that they feel really scared right now. It's a fear-based response in a lot of ways. People are really scared about getting sued. They're scared about having outbreaks in their workplace. They're scared about their employees getting sick, and they're scared about taking it home themselves, right? Employers are people too. And I think at the end of the day, employers are weighing their cards, thinking if the government is doing it, there's much less likelihood of me getting in trouble for mandating my employees to do this later. There's a greater confidence to do it because we saw for once government acting first.
Right. Now, I appreciate the angle that, employers might have a responsibility to bear to keep their workplaces safe. Why only COVID? Like, will this end with COVID? Will we add on other illnesses? Are temperature checks going to become perhaps part of the norm? Why not rapid test everybody who walks in, client or employee?
So it's an interesting question because I'm hearing more and more anecdotally from employees who are on suspensions, administrative leaves for not having taken the vaccine, that they're actually offering to test a couple of times a week. And employers are so scared and rigid, they're actually saying, no, if you don't have the vaccine, we're not going to actually consider anything other than that. It's very black and white right now. I think I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, but what I hear and what I understand is the research shows getting a flu shot and getting a COVID vaccine, the risks seem to be that much greater. The Occupational Health and Safety Act seems to support that if COVID or the introduction of COVID in your workplace might cause some kind of major harm to other employees, you as an employer might be breaching your obligations to the rest of the workplace. And we've seen also guidance from the Ontario Human Rights Commission saying imposing a vaccine mandate within the workplace seems generally reasonable, provided it is reasonable. It's a reasonable mandate. So for the first time, we're actually seeing very permissive institutions getting on board with this. And I think it's because of the inherent risks that we're seeing with COVID in compared to other things like the seasonal flu in the past.
Now, you mentioned the Ontario Human Rights Commission, and I did see some of their communication. I know that earlier on when we were discussing vaccine mandates in the summer, when these were first introduced in universities, I think that was the first context, there were exemptions for creed and medical. Now it seems creed has gone by the wayside, and the Ontario Human Rights Commission seems to have just said, you know what, this is not applicable here. We have about 20 seconds till commercial.
What I think is we're going to see very small exemptions when it comes to religion. All the exemptions we're seeing being tested, at least as employment lawyers, are on the medical side. The Pope said it best. It's an act of love to get the vaccine. I think many who might be seeking a religious exemption are going to think twice about it.
Welcome back. We're continuing our discussion on workplace vaccine mandates, and joining me again is Sunira Chaudhri from Workley Law. Sunira, just to let you know, right before you went to commercial, you said that the Pope said if it's an act of love to get the vaccine. Interestingly, though, I actually recently looked up the vaccine mandate for the Vatican, and they allow rapid tests for visitors and I guess the clergy or whomever works in the Vatican. So they're actually allowing those rapid tests. So I thought it was interesting because in Canada, I noticed some archdioceses and dioceses, there is no rapid test option, either get it or you're out kind of thing. So it's interesting how things are shaping. Now, can we ask this very clear question? Is a vaccine mandate legal?
I think so. Absolutely. Employers, by and large, are private institutions. Employers can contract for many things, such as credit checks, such as background checks. They may mandate how you groom yourself. They may mandate that you have a driver's license, as an example, in order to work there. It might just become, I think what we're seeing about the vaccine, it's becoming an implicit term of your employment, an implicit term of the application process. We're seeing many more employers asking that question really early on now to make sure that they understand who they're dealing with. So is it legal? In the private sphere, absolutely. I think if you're dealing with the public sphere, that is still up for some debate, whether or not a federal employer, as an example, or the province can actually mandate that, because it, as we've heard, might be a bit of a charter issue that's yet to be tested.
Okay, so is it legal? So say there was an employee to a small business who signed a contract, joined the firm years ago or joined the workplace, and now the contract is, if you could say, being revised. So before they were not said, oh, you've got to show us proof of X, Y, and Z vaccine, but now they are being asked that. Can an employer retroactively change your contract? Is this legal?
No. In most circumstances, I think the answer is absolutely not. You're not going to be able to engage in revisionist history, just like when employers laid off a lot of employees at the beginning of COVID and didn't have a layoff provision in their contract. They couldn't go back and rewrite history then either. If you didn't have the right to lay off an employee in your employment agreement and you proceeded to lay off an employee, you might have ended up with a wrongful dismissal suit. So it's an interesting question, but I think the public policy interest around getting the vaccine, it's so widely accepted now that the question is going to be, what is a judge going to do in this circumstance? Is a judge actually going to find a breach of contract in a case like this, where it's such an overwhelming understood public policy interest requirement for people to get the vaccine? And I think the other interesting point on that is you may, as an employee, by failing to get the vaccine, be seen to have frustrated your employment agreement. If you can't show up to work, if you can't get in the door because you don't have, you're not double vaxxed, and you can't meet with clients and things like that, or meet customers, if you can't do the job, there may be an argument actually that you have breached your employment agreement by failing to get the vaccine,
Wow.
not your
Very
employer.
interesting. Very interesting. So what options do employees have? Because there's still many who say, no, we're not getting the vaccine for medical or conscience reasons, whatever reason. What options do they have? Do they have no choice, but they have to submit to the mandate, or they're out essentially?
What I think employees should do, I'm talking to many employees in the last few weeks, especially, that have legitimate reasons. If we were sitting at dinner with them, Tanya, we would say, we get it. I talked to somebody just 2 days ago who said, I have diabetes, I have hypothyroidism, I have high blood pressure. I'm just nervous about getting the vaccine. And I suggested, instead of making it black and white, if you can share some of this information about your medical concerns, maybe don't go too far in terms of what they are to protect your own privacy, but talk about how long you think you might need before you decide if you're going to get that vaccine. Talk about PPE.
Right.
Talk about testing in the workplace, because who knows, maybe your employer hasn't thought about these things and you can find a way to be reasonable. I think right now employers have taken a very black and white approach to vaccines, but I think there's a gray area that we're about to see, especially if in some industries, some employers, some organizations, key employees don't get the vaccine.
Right.
I can bet you employers are going to find a way to make it work with those employees. And we're going to see a gray area expanding.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that there's more than just black and white on this issue, because that's all it seems some days in the media. Listen, Sunira, we're out of time, but thank you so much for joining me and excellent insight.
Thank you, Tanya.